If you touch her one more time, Elena said, her voice ice cold and absolute, I will make sure everyone in this room knows exactly what you are. The entire restaurant stopped breathing. She had her hand locked around the wrist of Madison Cole, the woman wearing a 3-carat diamond ring, the woman who smiled on the covers of charity galas, the woman who was engaged to the most dangerous man in the city, a man whose name made attorneys go quiet and police commissioners look the other way, a man who had never once in 42 years of life been told no by anyone. His fiancée was being held by a waitress, and the waitress was not letting go. If this story moves something in your chest, subscribe right now, hit that bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far one woman's courage can travel. Don't touch her again. Those 4 words came out of Elena Vasquez's mouth before her brain had finished deciding to say them, and the moment they landed in the air, she knew with the absolute quiet certainty of someone who has just stepped off a ledge that her life had divided itself into 2 clean halves. Everything before this sentence and everything after it. She was 34 years old. She had worked at Weston's for 6 years. She had never once in 6 years raised her voice above the required professional register. She had never filed a complaint, never caused a scene, never given Gerald, the floor manager, a single reason to write her name on anything other than the schedule. She had grabbed a woman's wrist in front of 40 people. Not just any woman, Madison Cole. The name meant different things to different people in the city. To the readers of the social pages, it meant philanthropy galas and fashion week front rows and a face that photographed beautifully in every light. To the lawyers who moved quietly through certain circles, it meant a woman who had signed a very specific kind of prenuptial agreement with a very specific kind of man. And to anyone who had ever sat across a table from Garrett Weston and watched him take a phone call that made everyone else in the room suddenly find somewhere else to be, to those people, Madison Cole's name meant one thing only. She was his. And you did not put your hands on what was his. Elena knew all of this. She had known all of it for the full 37 seconds between the moment her hand closed around Madison's wrist and right now standing in the center of the dining room with 40 pairs of eyes on her and the sound of her own heartbeat louder than anything else in the room. She didn't let go. I said, Elena repeated, and her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect, don't touch her again. Madison Cole looked down at Elena's hand on her wrist. Then she looked up at Elena's face. And in the careful surgical stillness of Madison's expression, the way it didn't change, didn't break, didn't give anything away. Elena read something that most people would have missed. She read it because she had spent 2 years watching this woman's face across a dining room, cataloging every micro-expression, every controlled shift, every performance of warmth, and the precise moment warmth turned off like a light switch. What she read was fear, not the visible kind, the buried kind, the kind that exists in people who have spent a very long time making sure no one ever sees it. Let go of my wrist, Madison said, quiet, surgical. Right now. Step back from this table, Elena said, right now. The table between them was Margaret Weston's table. Margaret herself sat perfectly still in her chair, her hands flat on the linen, her gray eyes moving between the 2 women with an expression Elena could not read. It was too layered, too old, too full of things that had been accumulating for much longer than this evening. The room had not resumed breathing. Elena heard someone at table 4 set down their fork. She heard it clearly, the way you hear small sounds when everything else has gone silent. She heard someone at table 9 push back their chair slightly. She heard the kitchen door behind her swing open half an inch and stop one of the line cooks she would think later, who had heard the silence and come to investigate it. She kept her hand where it was. You have no idea, Madison said softly, almost gently, almost as if she were doing Elena a kindness, what you are doing right now. I have a very clear idea, Elena said. No. Madison's voice dropped another register. It was almost inaudible now, just for Elena. You don't. You think this is about dinner. You think this is about a plate of food and a bread basket and a woman who you have decided needs a hero. A pause. You are not a hero. You are a waitress. And the man I am marrying will end your ability to work in this city, in any city. Do you understand me? He will make a call, one call, and you will cease to exist professionally, legally, in every way that matters. He has done it before. He will not lose a moment of sleep. Elena looked at her. She thought about the breadbasket. She thought about every Tuesday evening for 2 years, about the systematic, patient, invisible dismantling of a woman who told stories about green dresses and wrong wine and a husband who had made her laugh for 40 years. She thought about Margaret's hands reaching and stopping and settling back into her lap. She thought about the word the doctors used for what Margaret's heart was doing, the word Garrett had apparently shared with Madison so that Madison could use it as a leash. She thought about Margaret saying, "The best cruelty always looks like care." "One call," Elena said. "That's all it takes." "One call," Madison confirmed, and she almost smiled. Then, "Yeah." Elena said, "I suggest you stop giving him reasons to make calls and start paying attention to the woman sitting at this table who is trying to finish her dinner in peace." She released Madison's wrist. She stepped back. Precisely one step. Controlled. Deliberate. The step of a woman who is choosing to end a confrontation on her own terms and not because she has been moved. The silence in the room lasted another 3 seconds. Then someone at table 9. Elena never found out who, but she was grateful to them for the rest of her life, picked up their wine glass and resumed their conversation in a normal tone of voice. And the spell broke and the room refilled with sound, the way a held breath releases. Madison sat down. She sat down slowly, smoothing her dress, and she reached for her own wine glass. And she took a measured sip, and she set it down, and she looked across the table at Margaret Weston with an expression that Elena, watching from her station, not looking away, could only describe as recalibration. The practiced warmth of the performance loading back up. The software rebooting. "I'm sorry about that, Mother," Madison said in her soft, concerned voice. "Your server seems to be having a difficult evening." Margaret looked at her, just looked at her, said nothing. That nothing was enormous. Elena turned away and walked back to her station because she needed to, because staying would have been indulgent, because the dinner service was still ongoing, and there were 4 other tables who needed her. She picked up her order pad. She checked the status of Table 7's entree. She did all of these things with the mechanical precision of someone operating on a separated track professional function, continuing while the other part of her mind processed what had just happened. What had just happened was that she had grabbed the fiancé of Garrett Weston by the wrist in front of 40 witnesses. Garrett Weston, who owned this building, and 3 others like it. Garrett Weston, who had the kind of stillness in meetings that made people say yes before they understood what they were agreeing to. Garrett Weston, whose name appeared in enough newspaper articles with the right kind of language, allegedly sources close to decline, to comment that people in this city had developed an instinct about what those articles were not quite saying. Elena had read those articles. Everyone who worked at Weston's had read them. It was part of the unspoken orientation. You learned the menu, you learned the table map, and you learned without anyone saying it directly that your employer was a man with significant reach, and that significant reach was not always the kind conducted in boardrooms. She had grabbed his fiancée by the wrist. She checked Table 7's entree. She carried 3 water glasses to Table 11. She smiled at the couple at Table 2 who were celebrating something she could tell from the candle they'd brought themselves tucked into a purse and set up quietly when they thought no one was looking. She was aware without looking that Madison Cole had not taken her eyes off her since Elena had returned to her station. It was Danny who reached her first. He appeared at her elbow with the careful urgency of someone who has just watched a car accident and is still deciding whether to say they saw it. "Elena," his voice was low. "What did you just do?" "My job," she said. "Your job." He stared at her. "Your job." "Elena, that's Madison Cole." "I'm aware." "Do you know who she's marrying?" "Danny, I've worked here for 6 years." "Then you know." "I know exactly what I know," Elena said quietly. "And I know exactly what I saw, and I know that the woman at Table 11 has been waiting for her water for 7 minutes, and I need to deal with that first." Danny grabbed her arm gently. "He's going to fire you. Gerald is already on the phone. He was on the phone before you even walked away from the table." Elena looked at him. "Then he'll fire me." "Elena," she was hurting her Danny. Her voice dropped, went flat with the weight of something she had been carrying for 2 years. Not the way you can take a photograph of. The slow way, the way that doesn't leave marks. She has been doing it every Tuesday for 2 years, and I watched it every Tuesday for 2 years, and I didn't say anything, and tonight she stopped. "Tonight I said something." Danny looked at her for a long moment. He was a good man, Danny. He was the kind of person who understood the difference between right and advisable, even when the distance between those two things was enormous. Okay, he said finally. He let go of her arm. Okay, but you should know someone just texted Gerald. Weston is on his way in. Elena went completely still. He wasn't supposed to be here tonight, she said. He wasn't, Danny confirmed. And now he is. He paused. His car just pulled into the garage. Elena looked at table 11. She looked at her order pad. She looked at the kitchen door. She looked at the corner table where Margaret Weston was sitting very upright in her chair, and Madison Cole was watching Elena across the room with that expression, that controlled, patient, dangerous expression, and something inside of it that might have been satisfaction. She had known, Elena realized. Madison had known Garrett was coming. The evening had not surprised Madison Cole. It had proceeded exactly according to a plan Elena was only now beginning to understand the shape of. Danny, Elena said quietly, how long has Gerald been on the phone? Since right after it happened. And Garrett is how far out? 5 minutes, maybe less. Elena looked at the corner table one more time. Margaret caught her eye across the room. The older woman's face did something small and precise. Not quite a nod, not quite a smile, but something in between them that contained both. Something that said, I see you, I am still here, I have not gone away. Elena turned back to her station. She picked up the water pitcher. She walked to table 11 and refilled the glasses with a steady hand and smiled at the couple and told them their entrees would be out within 4 minutes and meant every word of it. Then she walked back to her station and set down the pitcher and stood very straight and waited. Because Garrett Weston was coming, and Elena Vasquez had just made herself the most visible person in the room. She thought about the first time she had ever spoken to Margaret a year and a half ago on a slow Wednesday when Madison hadn't been present and Margaret had come in alone and sat at her corner table and ordered tea and looked out the window with the expression of a woman who has a great deal to think about and no one to think it with. Elena had brought the tea. Margaret had thanked her. And then Margaret had looked up at her and said out of nowhere with the calm directness of a woman who had no use left for small talk, do you ever feel like you're watching something happen that no one else in the room can see? Elena had stood at that table for a moment. Sometimes, she'd said, what do you do when that happens? Elena had thought about it. I watch more carefully, she had said, until I'm sure of what I'm seeing. Margaret had nodded slowly. And then, Elena hadn't had an answer to that one. Not then. She had one now. The door of the restaurant opened. Garrett Weston came through it the way he always came through it, unbuttoning his coat before he cleared the threshold, scanning the room with the fast, comprehensive efficiency of a man who owned everything in his field of vision. He was tall, dark suit, no tie, the kind of face that looked like it had made difficult decisions for a long time and had learned to do it without showing the difficulty. His eyes moved through the room. They found Madison first, then his mother. Then they found Elena. They stayed on Elena for exactly 3 seconds. In 3 seconds, Elena understood something she had not understood before. She had spent 6 years being invisible to this man. And now in the space of 3 seconds, across the full length of his restaurant, she was the most visible thing in it. He walked toward his mother's wagon. He had not looked away from Elena yet. She held his gaze because she had nothing left to lose by holding it, and everything still left to say. He looked away first. He reached his mother's wagon. He spoke to Madison. He sat down across from Margaret. Elena watched him look at his mother's face, and she watched him see something in it, some small thing that registered in his expression for only a moment before his composure closed over it. And she watched that composure close over it, and she thought he sees it. For just 1 second, he sees it. He's been seeing it all along and not knowing what he's seeing. And that is the most heartbreaking kind of blindness there is. Gerald appeared at Elena's side. Mr. Weston will want to speak with you, he said. His voice was careful, professional, delivering a fact rather than a verdict. I know, Elena said. When he's finished at the table. I know. Gerald hesitated. Elena, I've known you for 6 years. Whatever happens, I want you to know that what you did tonight, what I saw. He stopped. Gerald was not a man given to incomplete sentences either. Just tell him the truth, all of it. Don't soften it. She looked at him. You saw it too. I've been seeing it for 8 months, Gerald said quietly. I didn't know what to do with it. Neither did I, Elena said. Until tonight. Gerald nodded once. He walked away. Elena stood at her station and she waited, and she thought about Margaret saying the best cruelty always looks like care. And she thought about Madison's face when she'd said one call, and she thought about the fact that Garrett Weston was sitting 10 feet away from her, and there were things on the security footage of this restaurant that he had never watched and that she was about to ask him to watch. And she thought because she was human, because she had a rent payment due on the 15th and a mother in Phoenix she sent money to, every month she thought about what happened to her if this went wrong. She thought about it for exactly 30 seconds. Then she stopped thinking about it, because Margaret Weston had picked up her fork. Across the room with her son, sitting across from her, and Madison Cole managing the conversation with her usual precision, Margaret had picked up her fork and was eating what remained of her dinner, with the slow, deliberate composure of a woman reclaiming something small but real. Elena watched her. She thought that's worth it. Whatever comes next, that is worth it. She didn't know, standing at her station with her order pad in her hand, that Garrett Weston had already decided to come find her when dinner was over. She didn't know that something in his mother's face, some quality of exhaustion he had never permitted himself to name before tonight, had cracked something open in him on the drive over long before he walked through the door. She didn't know that he had been watching his mother's face across the table for the past 15 minutes and seeing for the first time the face of a woman who had been made smaller than she was. And that he was beginning to understand with the particular nausea of a man confronting his own blindness that the making smaller had not happened in a single event, but across hundreds of small, quiet, invisible moments that he had not been present for. Elena Vasquez had been present for all of them. She had brought hot tea and extra bread and crouched down to even their heights and listened to stories about green dresses and wrong wine. And she had been the only person in his mother's life in 2 years who had simply consistently, without agenda or performance, treated Margaret Weston like a woman who still had the full weight of herself. He was sitting at that table right now, realizing that the person who had done all of that was a woman whose name he'd had to ask Gerald for this evening. The shame of that was going to stay with him for a very long time. But what was coming next was going to stay with him longer, because Madison Cole was smiling at him across the table, and she was talking about the wedding. And she was using the warm, practiced, seamless voice that he had trusted for 2 years. And his mother was sitting across from her with her fork in her hand and her eyes very slightly down. And somewhere in the security office of this building, 18 months of Tuesday evenings were waiting on a hard drive, and Elena Vasquez was waiting at her station. And Garrett Weston, for the first time in a very long time, was finally actually looking. Gerald had barely turned the corner when Elena heard the footsteps, not Gerald's careful, measured steps. These were different, deliberate, the kind of footsteps that didn't adjust their pace for anyone or anything in their path. She knew whose they were before she turned around, the way you sometimes know a storm is coming, before the first sound of thunder. Something in the air changes. Something in the pressure of the room shifts, and your body registers it before your mind catches up. She turned around. Garrett Weston was walking toward her with his coat already off-handed to someone she didn't see, and his eyes were fixed on her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not anger, not the cold efficiency she was used to. Something more complicated than either. Something that looked, if she were being precise about it, like a man who has just run a calculation and gotten a result that doesn't match any of his previous answers. Elena, he stopped 3 feet from her, not close enough to crowd, far enough to be deliberate. I need 5 minutes. I'm still on the floor, she said. Danny can cover your station. He didn't look for Danny. He didn't need to. Men like Garrett Weston didn't look for people. People arranged themselves. 5 minutes? The hallway? She set down the water pitcher. She followed him. The hallway off the main dining room was narrow and quiet, lined on one side with framed photographs of the restaurant over the decades. The original opening in 1987, the renovation in 2003, a black and white of a younger Margaret Weston cutting a ribbon with a pair of oversized scissors and laughing at something off camera. Elena had walked past that photograph 600 times. She had never stopped to look at it. She looked at it now quickly as she stepped into the hallway, and she thought, that is who she is. That is the woman who still exists inside the one sitting at that corner table. Garrett turned to face her. He crossed his arms, then uncrossed them, then put his hands in his pockets, and Elena noted this because Garrett Weston was not a man who fidgeted, and the fidgeting told her something the rest of his composed face was not. "Tell me what happened tonight," he said. "All of it, not the version that gets you fired and not the version that protects anyone. The actual version." She looked at him. "How much time do you actually have?" "As much as it takes," she told him. She told him about the breadbasket, not tonight's breadbasket. The first one she'd noticed 8 months ago before she understood it was a pattern. She told him about the soup taken away before it was finished. She told him about the phone call Madison had taken at the table for 11 minutes while Margaret sat across from her with her hands folded and her expression perfectly composed and her eyes doing the thing Elena had learned to identify as the face a person makes when they have trained themselves not to show that they are being erased. Garrett listened. He didn't interrupt. His jaw tightened twice, but he didn't interrupt. "She told your mother that her doctor had prescribed a specific dietary plan," Elena said. "She used it to control what Margaret ate, what she drank when she was done with her meal. Tonight was not the first time she tried to have a plate removed before your mother finished. Tonight was the 6th time. The 6th time," Garrett repeated, "in 4 months. The hallway was quiet. From the dining room, she could hear the low current of conversation, the clink of glasses, the sound of a restaurant proceeding on schedule, while the center of something important held very still in a side corridor. She grabbed your mother's arm," Elena said, 2 months ago, at the table, hard enough that your mother went quiet for the rest of the evening. I saw it. I should have said something then. I didn't know how to say it in a way that—" She stopped herself. She was not going to make this about her own hesitation. "I should have said something." Garrett's hands came out of his pockets. He put one hand flat against the wall. He was looking at the floor and his jaw was working through something that he clearly was not yet ready to say out loud. "She told me," he said slowly, "that my mother has been getting confused. That she's been saying things that don't track. That her doctor is concerned about early cognitive—" "Your mother," Elena said, and her voice was steady and quiet and carried the full weight of 2 years, "told me the story of her first date with your father. Every detail. The restaurant, the menu, the wrong wine, the green dress, the color of the tablecloth. She told it to me 3 weeks ago, and it was the same story with the same details she told me a year ago. She is not confused. She is being told she is confused. There is a profound difference." Garrett looked up from the floor. He looked at Elena like he was seeing her for the first time, and she knew that was true, and she also knew it was too late to matter in the way it might once have mattered, and she pushed that thought somewhere it couldn't distract her. "I need you to watch the footage," she said, "the security footage. Tuesday evenings the last 8 months, all of it." Something moved through his expression, not resistance. Something more complicated, the expression of a man who already knows what he will see and is bracing for the confirmation. "Where is Madison now?" he said. "She left," Elena said. "She took your mother home 15 minutes ago." He was quiet for a moment. "My mother went with her." "Your mother," Elena said carefully, "has been going with her every Tuesday for 2 years. She's been going because she doesn't know what else to do. Because she stopped. She caught herself at the edge of something that was true, but was also beyond what she was entitled to say in this hallway to this man. She pulled back. Because she loves you, and Madison is the woman you chose. And your mother is not the kind of woman who would ask you to choose between them." The silence that followed was the kind that means something landed. Garrett straightened up. He was quiet for so long that Elena began to calculate whether the conversation was over. Then he said, "How long have you known her, my mother?" "Really known her about 1.5 years. She started talking to me on the slow Tuesdays, when Madison was late or went to the restroom or there were windows, small ones. She'd talk about you, about your father, about the restaurant. She told me once that this is the only place left in the city that still feels like it belonged to her life before everything changed." His face did something she wasn't expecting. It broke very slightly, very briefly, like a crack in something that had been under pressure for a long time. He covered it immediately, but she saw it. "She never told me that," he said. "She wouldn't," Elena said. "She's protecting you." He stared at her. "She's protecting me, From feeling guilty for moving on after your father died, from feeling like you've neglected her. She would rather sit at a table with a woman who treats her like furniture than ask you to pay more attention, because asking would make you feel bad, and making you feel bad is something she will not do. Garrett turned away. He put both hands on the wall and stood like that for a moment, and Elena watched his shoulders and said nothing, because some things deserve their moment before you have to move through them. The footage, he said finally without turning around. Yes, she said, you're asking me to watch my own security footage because you believe it will show what you're describing. I'm asking you to watch your own security footage because I know it will show what I'm describing. I've been watching it happen live for 18 months, Mr. Weston. Cameras see what people decide not to. He turned back around. His face had been reassembled, the composure back in place, but different now. Something had been adjusted underneath it. Marcus is in the security office, he said. I'll cover my own station, she said. Take whatever time you need. He looked at her for one more long second. Then he said very quietly, why didn't you come to me sooner? It was a real question, not accusatory, genuinely asking, and Elena answered it with the honesty it deserved. Because I'm a waitress, she said, and you are Garrett Weston, and in 6 years you learned my name tonight. He had nothing to say to that, because there was nothing to say to it. He walked toward the security office. She walked back to the dining room. Danny materialized at her elbow within seconds. Well, he said, are you fired? Not yet, she said. What did he say? He's going to watch the footage. Danny stared at her. All of it. All of it. He was quiet for a moment. Then Elena, if he watches all of it, what is he going to see, Pagla? She picked up the water pitcher. The truth, she said. Finally. She went back to table 11 and checked on the couple with the candle. The woman was laughing at something, and the man was watching her laugh with an expression that Elena had come to recognize in 6 years of watching people eat dinner, to either as the face of someone who knows they have exactly the right person across from them and has not yet grown too comfortable to notice it. She smiled at them both and asked if they wanted anything else, and they said they were perfect, and she believed them and moved on. She was at the service station updating the check for table 7 when she heard Gerald's voice change pitch. Not loud, Gerald never raised his voice on the floor, but the pitch shifted, a tightening, a particular quality that Elena had learned in 6 years of working under him. And she looked up and she saw Gerald standing near the front entrance with his hand on his earpiece and his body angled toward the door in a way that communicated containment. She followed his line of sight. The man at the front entrance was not a patron. She knew that immediately. 6 years of reading rooms told her in less than a second he was wrong for the space in a way that had nothing to do with his clothes, which were correct, and everything to do with the way he stood in the doorway and looked at the room, not with the appetite of someone who has come to eat, but with the assessment of someone who has come to find something. Or someone. He was in his 40s, dark hair going silver at the temples. The kind of build that suggested he had once been required to be physically capable and had maintained the habit out of principle. And he was looking at the room the way Elena had seen Garrett Weston look at rooms, with the comprehensive efficiency of someone for whom information was operational. Gerald stepped forward to intercept him. Elena watched the brief, quiet exchange. The man said something she couldn't hear. Gerald's posture adjusted, not quite deference, but something adjacent to it. He gestured toward the back. The man nodded once and moved through the dining room without looking at anyone, the way people move when they own the floor they are walking on, even when they don't. Danny appeared beside her. You see that? I see him, Elena said. That's Victor Hale. Danny said, his voice very low. She looked at Danny. Who is Victor Hale? Garrett said, I don't know what his actual title is. Nobody does. He's been around since before I started here. He's not security. He's not legal. He's not management. He just appears when things get complicated. Danny paused. He appeared the last time someone filed a complaint against one of Garrett's business partners. The complaint was withdrawn the following week. Elena looked at the empty space where Victor Hale had moved through the room. He went toward the security office, she said. Yeah, Danny said. He did. The two of them stood at the service station for a moment in silence. Elena, Danny said, what exactly did you get yourself into tonight? She didn't answer because she didn't have one. She picked up the water pitcher again because that was the thing in front of her, and she was going to keep doing the things in front of her until she couldn't. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The dining room thinned the late tables, finishing up the low end of evening rhythm, taking hold. Elena ran her closing checklist and restocked the station and maintained the professional automaticity she had relied on for 6 years. And in the part of her mind that was not running the checklist, she thought about Garrett Weston in the security office watching 8 months of Tuesday evenings, and she thought about what he was seeing, and she thought about his face in the hallway when she'd said she's protecting you. At 9:47, the security office door opened. She didn't see it happen. She was at table 3. But she felt the change in the room's pressure, the particular quality of stillness that occurs when something significant enters a space, and she looked up and she saw Garrett Weston walking across the dining room floor toward her. He had been in that office for over an hour. His face was changed. That was the only word for it. The composure was still there, the bearing, the fundamental architecture of the man, but something behind it had been restructured. His eyes were different. They had the look of someone who has seen something that cannot be unseen and is still in the early process of understanding what it means that they didn't see it before. She finished at table 3. She walked toward him. They met at the midpoint of the dining room floor, and it was exactly as exposed and exactly as necessary as it felt. I watched it, he said, all of it. Enough. He paused. Victor Hale was with me. He pulled additional footage. Angles I wasn't aware we had. Another pause. Something moved across his face and was controlled. My mother's arm. 2 months ago, Elena said, at the table. The bruise, he said, and then he stopped talking because the sentence had apparently ended somewhere inside him rather than in the air between them. I didn't know about a bruise, Elena said carefully. She wore long sleeves for 3 weeks, he said. She told me she was cold. It's March. The dining room was almost empty. The remaining staff moved at the edges of the room with the quiet discretion of people who understood that something significant was happening in the center of it and were giving it space. What did Victor say? Elena said. Garrett looked at her. He said he's been watching Madison Cole for 6 weeks, independent of tonight. He said he started because he noticed something in December that didn't sit right, and he didn't bring it to me because he wanted to be certain. Elena felt something cold move through her chest. What did he notice in December? She had a meeting, Garrett said, with an attorney, not our attorney, an attorney who specializes in estate planning, specifically in the legal transfer of assets when an elderly individual has been assessed as cognitively diminished. The words sat between them. Elena heard them land, understood them, followed the implication to its logical end, and stood in that end for a moment with the full weight of what it meant. Margaret, the fabricated confusion, the doctor's reports that Madison had apparently been curating, the systematic patient reduction of a woman's credibility in the eyes of everyone around her, most importantly her son. All of it not gratuitous, not simply cruel, strategic, purposeful, building toward a specific and legal outcome. She wasn't just being cruel, Elena said, slowly. She was constructing a case. Yes, Garrett said, to have Margaret declared incompetent. To have her declared incompetent, he confirmed, and to have her self-designated as primary decision-maker for Margaret's affairs before the wedding made it complicated by shifting the estate dynamics. Elena put her hand on the edge of the nearest table, not for support exactly, more because she needed something solid in the room. Garrett, it was the first time she had used his name without the honorific. Neither of them noted it, and both of them noted it. Your mother is alone with her right now. He said nothing. She took her home tonight, Elena said. She always takes her home. And Margaret, I called my mother's house, he said. 10 minutes ago, Madison answered. He stopped. She said my mother was already in bed, tired from the evening. She said she'd have her call me in the morning. He said it with the precision of someone reporting facts while suppressing the full register of what those facts mean. Elena looked at him. When was the last time you spoke directly to your mother without Madison present? He was quiet for a very long time. February, he said. It was April. Elena didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She watched him arrive at the calculation himself and watched his face when he did. I need to get to her tonight, he said, not to Elena specifically, to the decision he was making. Yes, Elena said. You do. He looked at her then directly fully with the complete attention of someone who has stopped performing and is simply present and said, "Would you come with me?" She stared at him. "She trusts you," he said simply. "She talks to you. If I go there tonight and if Madison has been working on her, she might not say what she needs to say if I'm the only one in the room. She might protect me. You said yourself, she'll protect you from what makes you feel bad," Elena said. "Yes." He held her gaze. "So come with me. Be the person in the room that she'll actually tell the truth to." Elena thought about her rent. She thought about the professional line she'd been standing on all evening, the one she'd already crossed twice. She thought about Victor Hale and attorneys and 6 weeks of independent surveillance, and the word bruise used to describe something found under her sleeve 3 weeks after the fact. She thought about Margaret's hands wrapping around a cup of hot tea. "It's nice to be brought something warm." "Let me get my coat," Elena said. He nodded once. He pulled out his phone and she heard him say Victor's name as she walked toward the back, and she didn't hear the rest because she was moving fast now, moving with the focused momentum of someone who has made a decision and is following it to whatever it leads. Danny was in the back corridor. He took one look at her face and her coat in her hands and said, "You're leaving with him?" "Yes." "Elena." "I know," she said. "Do you because Victor Hale is in there? And Garrett Weston just watched 8 months of security footage, and whatever he saw has him making calls, and now he's leaving with you, and I need you to hear me." Danny lowered his voice to almost nothing. "These are not people who handle things the way regular people handle things. These are not people who file grievances or call attorneys first. These are people who—" "I know what kind of people they are, Danny," Elena said. She put on her coat. "And right now, those people are the ones willing to help an old woman who is alone in her house with someone who has been hurting her for 2 years." She looked at him. "So I'm going." Danny pressed his lips together. "Call me," he said. "When you get there, when you're okay, call me." "I'll call you," she said. She walked back through the kitchen and out into the corridor, and Garrett was waiting, coat on phone in his pocket. Victor Hale standing 2 steps behind him with the still calibrated alertness of a man who was always ready for what came next. Victor looked at her when she appeared. He assessed her in one fast, comprehensive pass. She felt it like a hand running over the cover of a book, and then he looked at Garrett and gave a single small nod that she understood was not about her personally, but about Garrett's judgment in including her. The 3 of them walked toward the exit. Elena had walked out of the back of this restaurant 600 times, into the cold toward the parking garage end of shift, end of service end, of another evening of making herself invisible in a room full of people who needed her to be. She knew exactly how that walk felt. This walk felt entirely different. This walk felt like the end of something, or the beginning. She was 3 steps from the door when her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She pulled it out. Unknown number. She almost put it back. She answered it on instinct, 6 years of answering when called. Elena Vasquez. The voice was female, professional, urgent in the specific muted way that professional people express urgency. "Yes," she said. "My name is Dr. Patricia Holt. I'm the attending physician at St. Clement's. I'm calling because I have a patient here, Margaret Weston, who was brought in approximately 40 minutes ago. She listed you as an emergency contact." Elena stopped walking. "She's asking for you, Tio," the doctor said. The corridor went silent except for the sound of Elena's own breath. She looked up. Garrett was 2 steps ahead of her. He had heard her stop. He was turning around looking at her face, and whatever he read there made his own face change immediately. "What hospital?" Elena said into the phone. "St. Clement's. Bontum. I know where it is," Elena said. She looked at Garrett. "Your mother is at St. Clement's." The 3 words moved through Garrett Weston like a current. "How long?" he said. It was not a question directed at Elena. It was the question of a man doing a fast, terrible calculation about timelines and decisions and the gap between when something happened and when he found out. 40 minutes, Elena said. "She listed me as her emergency contact." He stared at her. "She listed me," Elena said again quietly, "not Madison." The silence in the corridor lasted exactly 1 second. Then Garrett said Victor and was already moving. And Victor was already moving, and Elena was already moving, and the three of them came through the back exit of Weston's restaurant into the cold March night, and the door swung closed behind them, and the last thing Elena heard as it shut was the ambient sound of the dining room that she had been a part of for 6 years, the glasses, the voices, the hum of a room full of people eating dinner and not knowing what was happening 20 feet away. Then the door closed and the city swallowed them, and they were running. St. Clement's was 12 minutes from the restaurant. Garrett made it in 7. Elena knew this because she was in the backseat of his car counting the minutes. The way you count things when your mind needs something to hold on to that isn't the worst version of what might be waiting at the end of the drive. Victor was in the front passenger seat, already on the phone, speaking in the low-clipped cadence of someone issuing instructions that would be followed without question. She caught fragments. Legal. Tonight. Don't move anything. She stopped listening because the fragments were assembling themselves into a picture she wasn't ready to look at directly yet. Garrett drove in silence. His hands were on the wheel and his jaw was set, and he had not said a single word since they left the restaurant. Elena had learned enough about him in the past 2 hours to understand that his silence was not absence. It was concentration. He was running scenarios, processing, arriving at decisions before the information that would require them had fully surfaced. It was, she thought, both his greatest strength and the thing that had allowed him to miss 2 years of Tuesday evenings. She looked out the window and thought about Margaret saying, "I listed you as my emergency contact," and then immediately understood that Margaret hadn't said that the doctor had said it. Margaret had simply done it quietly without explanation at some point in the past that Elena couldn't pinpoint, and the thought of that hit her differently than she expected. Margaret had written her name down, on a form, in the box that said who to call. Not Madison, not Garrett's assistant, not one of the city's significant people who passed through that corner table. Elena Vasquez, the waitress who brought her tea at the right temperature. She had to look away from the window for a moment because her eyes were doing something she didn't have time for. The hospital entrance opened automatically, and Garrett was through it before the doors had fully parted, moving with the focused velocity of a man who had shed every other identity and was operating now as one thing only, a son. Elena followed. Victor peeled off to the left, phone still at his ear, and she didn't watch where he went because Garrett had already reached the reception desk and was speaking to the nurse on duty with a controlled urgency that made the woman behind the desk sit up straighter. "Margaret Weston," he said. "She was brought in within the last hour. I'm her son." The nurse's hands moved over her keyboard. "And your name?" "Garrett Weston." A pause. The nurse looked at her screen. Her expression shifted slightly, not dramatically, but Elena caught it, the particular micro-adjustment of someone who has just cross-referenced a name against information on their screen and found something that requires care. "Mr. Weston," she said carefully, "there's a note on the file. One moment, please." "What kind of note?" "I need to get the attending for you, sir, if you'll just—" "What kind of note?" he said again, quiet, absolute. The voice he used, Elena understood now, when he was using the weight of who he was to move an obstacle. She had heard that voice directed at other people. It was something different to be this close to it. The nurse reached for her phone. Within 90 seconds, a woman in a white coat was coming down the corridor toward them with the brisk, practiced walk of someone who delivers difficult information regularly and has learned to carry it without letting it slow her pace. "Dr. Patricia Holt," she said, extending her hand to Garrett. Then she looked at Elena. "You must be Elena Vasquez." "Yes," Elena said. "Mrs. Weston asked for you specifically." "She's stable. I want you to know that immediately. She's stable and alert, and she is going to be fine." Dr. Holt said it like a woman who knows that the word fine is doing a lot of work in a sentence, and the people hearing it deserve to know exactly how much. She came in with elevated blood pressure, some cardiac irregularity, and significant distress. "We've got her stabilized, but she needs to rest, and she needs—" The doctor paused. "She needs the environment that caused the distress to be addressed." Garrett looked at her. "What caused it?" Dr. Holt's expression did something precise and careful. "That's something your mother can speak to herself, Mr. Weston. She's been asking to speak to someone since she arrived. She wouldn't tell us much until—" She glanced at Elena. "She asked us to call you first." Elena felt the full weight of that settle over her. "Take us to her," Garrett said. Margaret was awake. Elena knew she would be. She had never been able to imagine Margaret Weston doing anything as yielding as lying down in a hospital bed and surrendering to the situation. She was propped up against the pillows with the same precise posture she maintained at the corner table, her gray hair loose around her face, and she looked smaller than she did at the restaurant, which was the most frightening thing Elena had seen all evening, because Margaret at the restaurant had already been made smaller than she was. This was smaller than that. But her eyes, when they found Elena in the doorway, were completely clear. "There you are," Margaret said. Elena crossed the room. She did not think about whether she should. She pulled the chair close to the bed and sat down and took Margaret's hand, and Margaret led her, and that was the whole of it. No performance, no distance, just two women on either side of something that had gone on too long. "I'm here," Elena said. "I know," Margaret said. "I knew you'd come." Garrett stood at the foot of the bed. He was looking at his mother with an expression that Elena did not look at directly because it was too private, the expression of a man confronting a failure of love that was never intentional and is therefore harder, not easier to live with. "Mom," he said. His voice was different, stripped of the register he used with everyone else. "Mom, I need you to tell me what happened tonight." Margaret looked at her son. She looked at him the way mothers look at their children when they are about to say something that they have been protecting their children from and have finally decided they cannot protect them from anymore. "Sit down, Garrett," she said. He sat. "I've been wanting to tell you something for a long time," Margaret said. "And I didn't because I know how you are about Madison. I know you love her. I know you've built a picture of your future with her in it, and I know what it means when someone tries to take that picture apart." She paused. She looked down at Elena's hand over hers. "And I know that a mother who criticizes the woman her son loves is very often the villain of that story. I didn't want to be the villain." "Mom, let me finish." She said it gently but with absolute authority. "Tonight she told me that my memory tests had come back irregular. She showed me a document on her phone, a letter, she said, from Dr. Ambrose." She paused. "I don't have a Dr. Ambrose, Garrett. I have Dr. Reeves. I have had Dr. Reeves for 11 years. The room went very still. "She said Dr. Ambrose had been consulted by Dr. Reeves," Margaret continued, "and that they both agreed I needed supervised living arrangements. She said she and you had already discussed it, that you'd agreed it was the best thing." She looked at her son. "She said you cried when you made the decision, that it was very hard for you." Garrett's face had gone white. "She showed me a letter," Margaret said, "on Ambrose Medical Group letterhead, recommending immediate transition to managed care. She said the paperwork was already being filed, that it was for my safety." She paused. "And I sat in that car outside this hospital, and I thought about what Elena said to me weeks ago at the table. She said, 'You deserve better than this, Margaret.' And I thought maybe she's right. And I thought I am 73 years old and I am not confused and I have never had a Dr. Ambrose, and this letter is not real." She said it plainly, with the certainty of a woman who has spent a lifetime being precise about what she knows and does not know. "So I called for an ambulance," she said, "from the chem while she was parking. I told her I felt chest pain," which was true. I did feel chest pain because I was terrified and furious and I needed to get out of that car. Garrett stood up. He stood up the way a man stands when he needs to move and has nowhere to go. He turned away from the bed for a moment. Elena watched his shoulders. She watched him manage himself. Then he turned back. "She fabricated medical documentation," he said, "not a question." "Yes," Margaret said, "I believe so. To convince you that you were losing your mind. To convince me, and I suspect—" Margaret looked at her son steadily, "to use as the basis for a legal petition. Cognitive impairment, supervised living. If I'm declared incompetent—" "Garrett, do you know what happens to the trust your father left?" He knew, Elena could see that he knew, and that he was standing at the far edge of what knowing it felt like. "It falls to the next of kin in a managing capacity," he said. "Which after we're married would be Madison," Margaret said. The words sat in the room and did not move. Elena thought about Victor Hale in December watching Madison walk into a meeting with an estate attorney. 6 weeks of watching. The patience of someone who suspects something but has to be certain. Victor had been building the same picture from the outside, that Margaret had just drawn from the inside and they had arrived at the same place from opposite directions, and the place they had arrived at was devastating. "There's more," Margaret said. Garrett looked at her. "The house," she said. "Your father's house, the one I still live in. She had me sign a document 3 months ago. She told me it was an update to my insurance policy. She brought it to dinner here at the restaurant. She had a pen ready. I signed it in the back of the car." She paused. "I never read it." "Mom," Garrett said, and his voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. "I know," she said. "I know, but she was very good at making things feel normal. That's what I need you to understand. Each thing she did, each small thing, it felt like ordinary life. It felt like someone taking care of you. And I think that's how it works. I think that's the whole design of it." Elena was holding Margaret's hand and watching Garrett and thinking about the word design because that was the right word, and Margaret had landed on it with the precision of a woman who had been living inside the design for 2 years and had finally gotten far enough outside it to see its shape. Garrett pulled out his phone. He called Victor. The conversation lasted 45 seconds. When he ended the call, his face had the expression of a man who has just closed a door that is not going to open again. "Victor is pulling the document," he said. "He's been monitoring several of Madison's activities for the past 6 weeks. He has access." He paused. "He says there are 4 documents, not one." Margaret closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were dramatized. "I am not surprised," she said quietly. "She is very thorough." "She had an attorney on retainer," Garrett said. Someone named Carver. Victor flagged the name 6 weeks ago because Carver specializes in..." He stopped. He started again. "Carver spent 8 years as a public defender specializing in contested guardianship cases. He knows every legal mechanism for transferring management of an elderly person's affairs. He knows how to make it look clean, bureaucratic. He knows how to make the family of the person sign off on it without understanding what they're signing." The silence that came after that was thick with implication, and Elena sat in it and thought about all the things Garrett had signed in the past 2 years without reading them carefully, because why would he? Because his fiancée had handed them to him, and his fiancée was someone he trusted, and the whole architecture of the plan depended on that trust being intact until the moment it was no longer needed. "Garrett," Elena said carefully. She had been quiet long enough. "Where is Madison right now?" He looked at her. "At my apartment." "Does she know where your mother is?" He paused. He thought about it. "No. She thinks Margaret called an ambulance from a cardiac episode. She texted me 20 minutes ago saying she was worried, asking which hospital." He looked at his phone. "I haven't responded." "Don't," Elena said. He looked at her. "Don't respond yet," she said. "Victor has 6 weeks of documentation. You have the security footage. You have Margaret's testimony. You have a fabricated medical letter. But if Madison knows that you know before you've secured all of it, she'll move," he said. He understood immediately. The files, the documents, the attorney, whatever was already in motion legally, it could be accelerated. Evidence could be managed. Narratives could be prepared. A woman who had spent 2 years building a plan this careful was not going to fold cleanly if she saw it collapsing. "She'll move," Elena confirmed. Victor walked through the door at that moment. He had the particular quality of a man who had done exactly what needed doing and was ready to report. He looked at Garrett first, then Margaret, then he looked at Elena for a half second with that same comprehensive assessment, and this time what she read in it was different. It was something closer to respect. "Carver filed a preliminary petition 4 days ago," Victor said. "Cognitive assessment pending, but the filing is in the system. It names Madison Cole as proposed guardian and managing trustee." He paused. "It also cites supporting testimony from a Dr. Raymond Ambrose." "Who is Dr. Raymond Ambrose?" Garrett said. "A retired physician in Scottsdale, Arizona, who lost his license in 2019. He's been providing paid assessments for Carver's cases for the past 3 years." Victor said it the way people deliver facts that are worse than the worst version you imagined. "His assessment is fraudulent. Provably so. Carver knows they're fraudulent. This is not the first time this particular arrangement has been used." The room absorbed this. Margaret sat in her hospital bed and said nothing. and the nothing had the quality of a woman who is furious and exhausted and vindicated all at once, and is not yet sure which of those feelings to let out first. How many times, Garrett said. This would be the fourth, Victor said. Carver and Ambrose. 3 prior cases, all elderly women, all with significant assets, all with a common factor. He looked at Garrett directly. Each of them had a romantic partner involved in the guardianship petition. The word fell through the floor. Previous partners, Garrett said slowly. Before me. Before you, Victor confirmed. She's done this before. It was not a question. Garrett was arriving at the shape of something so much larger than a Tuesday evening in a restaurant, and Elena watched him arrive at it and saw the moment he understood that this was never about him, specifically that he had simply been the next name on a list, that his mother had simply been the next woman in a pattern, and that the woman he had chosen to spend his life with had never once in 2 years chosen him back. She had chosen his mother's assets. She had chosen the Weston name on a trust document. She had chosen the house, the legacy, the inheritance, and she had chosen Garrett as the mechanism by which she would access all of it. He was quiet for so long that Elena began to count seconds without meaning to. Then he said, "Call my attorney, not the firm James Whitfield directly, his personal line." He said it to Victor. "Tell him I need him tonight. Tell him to bring whatever he needs to freeze, 4 documents, reverse a fraudulent guardianship petition, and prepare a criminal referral for fraud." Victor nodded. He was already out the door. Garrett turned to his mother. He walked around the bed and he sat on the edge of it carefully, the way you sit next to someone you're afraid of breaking, and he took her hand. Both hands. He held them in his the way you hold something you were afraid of having almost lost. "Mom," he said, and then he didn't say anything else, because there wasn't a sentence yet that was adequate, and he knew it, and she knew it, and they sat in that for a moment. "Don't cry, sweetheart," Margaret said. Her voice was dry and warm and completely steady. "You're too old to cry in hospitals." "I'm 42, he said. "Exactly," she said. "Too old." He laughed. It was a short sound, not entirely happy, but real. It broke something in the room that needed breaking. "I should have been there, Mum," he said. "On the Tuesdays I should have." "You're here now," she said. "That's not sufficient." "Garrett," her voice was firm, motherly in the specific, non-negotiable way that doesn't allow argument. "We're not doing that tonight. Tonight is for what needs doing. We can feel bad about it later, and I will allow that for approximately 30 minutes, and then we are moving forward. Are we agreed?" He looked at his mother for a moment. Then he said, "Agreed." "Good." She looked at Elena. "Now, how did you end up in my hospital room at 10 o'clock at night when you were supposed to be working until close?" Elena looked at her. "You listed me as your emergency contact." "I know I did," Margaret said. "That was deliberate. I did it 8 months ago." A pause. "Because I decided 8 months ago that you were the person I trusted most in the context of whatever Madison was building toward. I didn't know exactly what she was building, but I knew it was something. And I knew that when it arrived, I wanted you in the room. 8 months. 8 months of deliberate trust maintained quietly without explanation, without asking anything in return." "You could have told me," Elena said, "months ago, what was happening. You could have asked me to." "I couldn't ask you," Margaret said simply. "You could have lost your job." "Elena, she told Garrett things about me that weren't true. What do you think she would have done to you if she thought you were a threat?" She paused. "I was protecting you." Elena stared at her. "You were protecting her," Garrett said slowly, looking at his mother. "You were protecting Elena." "Of course I was," Margaret said, as though it were obvious. "She was kind to me when she didn't have to be. Kindness is worth protecting." She said it simply, without ornamentation, in the tone of a woman who has held this particular conviction for 73 years and has no intention of softening it. Elena's hand, still holding Margaret's, tightened briefly. She didn't trust herself to say anything, so she didn't say anything, and that was fine, and Margaret seemed to understand that it was fine. "What happens now?" Margaret said, looking at her son. "James is coming," Garrett said. "Victor is securing the documents. The petition gets frozen tonight, and..." He paused. He said the next part with the flatness of someone delivering a verdict they have already fully handed down inside themselves. "I'm going to the apartment. Margaret looked at him. To Madison. Yes. Garrett. Her grip on his hand tightened. She is not simply unpleasant. She is dangerous in a specific legal premeditated way. You understand that? I understand that, he said. Victor will be with me. That's not what I mean. She looked at him carefully. I mean, she will not simply accept this. She has too much to lose. She has been building this for too long. When you go to her, she will not become someone who did something shameful and is now caught. She will become someone defending the version of events she has already prepared. Because she will have one. She always has one. A pause. You know the version she'll use. He was quiet. She'll say I've been confused, Margaret said. That I fabricated the story about the letter. That my cardiac episode tonight was the proof of her concern. That she has been caring for me. That Elena, she looked at Elena. That Elena has been manipulating me. An unstable employee with a grudge against the owner's fiancée who befriended a vulnerable old woman and filled her head with suspicions. The room was very quiet. Elena felt the architecture of it, felt how cleanly it would work on someone who didn't have the footage, the documentation, the paper trail Victor had spent 6 weeks assembling. Felt how it would have worked 3 hours ago before any of tonight had happened. Felt how close it had been. How many Tuesday evenings away from a different outcome and the closeness of it moved through her like something cold. She won't have the same tools tomorrow that she has tonight, Garrett said. By morning, the petition is frozen, the documents are in our attorney's hands, and Carver and Ambrose are named in a fraud referral. The only narrative base she'll have access to is words. Words are enough for some things, Margaret said. Not for this, he said. Not with Victor's documentation, not with 18 months of security footage, not with 3 prior cases that Carver's involvement just connected her to. He stood, he straightened. The sun receded slightly and the other version of Garrett Weston, the one whose name made attorneys go quiet, moved back to the surface. And Elena watched it happen and understood for the first time that those two things were not in opposition. They were the same man, the same force, just pointed finally in the right direction. She built this with patience and silence and the assumption that no one was watching. He looked at Elena when he said the last part. Someone was watching, he said. Elena held his gaze. The door opened. Victor. Whitfield is 20 minutes out. And Garrett, a pause. Madison sent 3 texts while you were in here. The last one says she's coming to the hospital. The 3 words detonated quietly in the room. Garrett didn't move. He looked at Victor. How long ago? Last text was 4 minutes ago. She knows which hospital. She tracked your car, Victor said flatly. There's an app on your phone. She installed it 7 months ago. It's disguised as a utility program. I found it last week and didn't remove it because I didn't want her to know I knew. A 7-month-old app. 7 months of knowing exactly where Garrett was at every moment. 7 months of data, which nights he came to the restaurant, which nights he stayed, who he met with, and when, and for how long. 7 months of that information feeding into whatever calculations Madison Cole had been running about timing and positioning and how to arrange the next step. She'll be here in minutes, Victor said. Garrett turned to Elena. I need you to stay with my mother. I'm not leaving, Elena said. And if she gets to this room before I get to the lobby... She won't get to this room, Elena said. She said it with a quiet certainty that surprised her because she had not planned to say it and did not entirely know where it came from, only that she meant every word. I will be here. Margaret will be here. You go. He looked at her for one long second. Then he turned to his mother. I'll be back. I know, Margaret said. Go. He went. Victor went. The door swung closed. Margaret looked at Elena. Well, the older woman said after a moment. Well, Elena agreed. I always thought you'd be good in a crisis, Margaret said. I was right. Elena almost laughed. It came out somewhere between a laugh and a long exhale. You could have mentioned that 8 months ago when you were writing my name on the emergency contact form. I could have, Margaret said, but then you would have been worried and I didn't need you worried. I needed you exactly as you were. She paused. Steady. Elena sat back in the chair. She was still holding Margaret's hand. She did not let go. From somewhere in the direction of the lobby, she heard voices, not close yet, not in the corridor, but their present building a particular quality of confrontation gathering at a distance, moving through the hospital, the way weather moves felt before it arrives. Elena looked at the closed door. She thought about Madison Cole walking into this building with her prepared version of events and her practiced warmth in the full confidence of someone who has never yet been stopped. She tightened her grip on Margaret's hand. She was not moving. The voices got closer. Elena heard them before she could make out words. A woman's voice, high and controlled, and a man's voice she didn't recognize, and then a third voice, lower and steadier, that she recognized as Victor Hale's. The three of them moving through the corridor like a weather system, getting louder and then stopping. Right outside the door. Margaret heard it too. Her hand tightened around Elena's, not in fear, in the particular bracing of a woman who has been waiting for something to arrive and is now ready for it. The door opened. Madison Cole walked in first. She was still in the clothes she'd worn to dinner. Her coat was on her hair, was perfect, and she wore the expression of a deeply concerned woman. The eyes soft with worry, the mouth slightly parted with urgency. She had assembled it completely. Elena recognized the performance in the first second, the way you recognize a song by its opening note. Then Madison saw Elena. The worried expression held for exactly one beat. Then something moved underneath it, something fast and cold and calculating, and then the expression resumed, seamlessly, the way a professional resumes after a disruption. Margaret, Madison crossed toward the bed. Thank God, I was so frightened. When Garrett's tracker showed him here, I came immediately. I couldn't just... Stop, Margaret said. Madison stopped. It was the first time Elena would think about this later, going over the evening, the way you go over something that mattered, the first time she had ever heard Margaret Weston use that word with that particular quality of authority. Not a request, not a gentle redirect, a stop that meant the performance was over, and Margaret knew it was over and was done pretending otherwise. Madison looked at her. The concern recalibrated itself, became something softer, more wounded. The version of herself she used when someone she loved was confused and needed gentling. Mother, she said softly, I know you've had a frightening night. Your heart. My heart is fine, Margaret said. Sit down, Madison. I said sit down. A silence. Madison sat. She chose the chair on the opposite side of the bed from Elena, which meant she had to look past Margaret to see Elena, which meant Elena was in her peripheral vision at all times. A fact that Elena understood was not accidental and was not comfortable for Madison. Victor Hale had positioned himself just inside the closed door. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Where is Garrett? Madison said. She directed it at Elena. The voice had gone flat, the performance briefly suspended in favor of something more operational. He'll be here shortly, Elena said. Why are you here? Madison said. You're a waitress. This is a family situation. I don't understand why you're... She's here because I asked her to be, Margaret said. She's here because I listed her as my emergency contact. She's here because she is the person in this room I trust most, and if you have a problem with that, I'd like to hear you explain why. Madison looked at Margaret. The wounded expression was back, dialed up slightly. Margaret, I know that Elena has been friendly with you at the restaurant, and I appreciate that she's been attentive, I do, but I think she may have filled your head with some ideas about me that aren't... She showed me the letter, Margaret said. Madison went very still. The letter from Dr. Ambrose, Margaret said, in the car, before we got to the hospital. You showed me a letter from a physician I have never seen citing a cognitive assessment. I never had recommending supervised living arrangements that you told me Garrett had already agreed to. A pause. I'd like to hear you explain that. The room was completely quiet. Elena watched Madison, watched her process the terrain, watched the calculations run behind the careful surface of her face. She was deciding which version to use. Elena could see the decision being made in real time, the way a chess player scans the board before committing to a move. Madison chose wounded truth. I can explain that, she said. She leaned forward slightly. Her voice was low and earnest and so convincing that Elena, who knew precisely what was happening, felt the pull of it. That was the thing about Madison. She was genuinely convincing. Not because she was a good liar, because she understood what people needed to hear, and she provided it at exactly the right emotional register. Margaret, that letter? I know how it looked. I know that without context, it looked frightening and official, and I should never have shown it to you in a car. That was my mistake. I can see that now. But the conversation with Dr. Ambrose was meant to be preliminary, exploratory, because I've been worried about you. Her voice softened further. For months. The repetitions, the moments when you've lost track mid-conversation, the times you've asked me things you asked me 20 minutes before, that has never happened, Margaret said. Mother, it has never happened, Margaret said again. Calm, precise, immovable. I have never repeated myself to you. I have never lost track of a conversation. I have never exhibited a single symptom that you are describing, and we both know that. A pause. And I suspect that Dr. Ambrose's file on me reflects something quite different from reality, because I have never met Dr. Ambrose, and the only way he could have produced an assessment of my cognition is if someone provided him with fabricated data. Madison was quiet for 3 full seconds. Elena counted. That's a very serious accusation, Madison said. It is, Margaret agreed, and I am making it with full confidence in my own mind, which is exactly as sharp as it has ever been. The door opened. Garrett came in. He had James Whitfield with him, a compact, gray-haired man with the brisk energy of an attorney who has been called at 9:30 at night before and knows how to be useful immediately. Victor straightened slightly when they entered. Madison turned. The moment she saw Whitfield, something changed in her face. It was small, extremely small. Elena almost missed it, but she was watching for it. Madison recognized Whitfield. She knew what his presence meant. Garrett, she stood. She turned toward him with the open, relieved expression of someone who has been waiting for the person who will restore order. I'm so glad you're here. Your mother is very upset, and I think there's been a misunderstanding about... Sit down, Madison, Garrett said. He said it the same way his mother had said it, flat and final with nothing beneath it that invited discussion. Madison looked at him and the calculation ran again, and she sat. Garrett looked at his mother first. Just for a moment. Something passed between them, quick, private, complete, and then he turned his attention to Madison, and it was a different quality of attention entirely, the kind he used in meetings with people who had done something he needed to address. James, he said, without looking away from Madison. Tell her. Whitfield opened the slim folder he was carrying. He did not look like a man reading from notes. He looked like a man delivering a verdict he had been preparing for the duration of the drive over. Miss Cole, he said, my name is James Whitfield. I've been counsel to the Weston family for 19 years. I'm here tonight because several matters have come to my attention that require immediate legal action. He paused, not for effect, for precision. At approximately 9:15 this evening, I filed an emergency motion to freeze a guardianship petition submitted 4 days ago to the county probate court under your name, naming Margaret Ann Weston as subject and citing assessment by a Dr. Raymond Ambrose as supporting documentation. He looked at her over his reading glasses. That petition has been frozen pending a fraud investigation. Madison said nothing. In addition, Whitfield continued, I have initiated a review of 4 documents signed by Margaret Weston in the past 14 months. Documents she signed under the impression that they were insurance updates and routine estate maintenance. Our initial review suggests at least 2 of those documents involved unauthorized or misrepresented transfers of asset management authority. We'll know more by morning. Madison's face was doing something Elena had never seen it do before. It was not the wounded expression or the concerned expression or the warm performance or even the cold calculation she'd seen in brief flashes. It was the expression underneath all of those, the one that existed when every practiced layer had been stripped away. Elena couldn't name what it was exactly. It was too complex and too swift and too human for a single word. You have no basis for a fraud investigation, Madison said. Her voice was very controlled. Dr. Ambrose is a licensed physician. Dr. Ambrose's license was revoked in the state of Arizona in 2019, Whitfield said. He has continued to practice in an advisory capacity through a shell consultation firm that charges flat fees for written assessments he does not personally conduct. His name on a medical document has the appearance of authority and the legal standing of a forged signature. I wasn't aware. You retained him through an attorney named Carver, Whitfield said, who has used this same arrangement in 3 prior cases, all involving elderly women with significant assets and romantic partners positioned for legal access. He paused. Victor Hale has been documenting the Carver connection for 6 weeks. We have a substantial record. Madison looked at Garrett. She dropped every other expression and looked at him directly for the first time since he had walked into the room. And for just a moment, one single unguarded moment, what Elena saw in her face was not fear of legal consequence. It was the face of someone who has realized that the person they had most thoroughly deceived is now standing across a room with complete knowledge, and that there is nowhere left to construct a version of themselves that he will believe. Garrett, she said quietly, can we speak privately? No, he said. The word was not loud. It was not cold. It was simply the end of something. I think, Madison said slowly, and now the voice was shifting again, shifting into something Elena recognized as the last available tool, the one people reach for when every other approach has failed, which was the appeal to history, to shared life, to the weight of 2 years. I think you owe me the chance to explain. After everything we've... Madison, he said her name the way you say the name of a fact you have accepted. Victor has 18 months of documentation. James has 4 documents with your signature orchestrating the transfer of my mother's assets. There are 3 prior cases in 2 other states that are going to surface in the next 48 hours. And my mother, he stopped. He steadied. My mother has a bruise on her arm that she wore long sleeves to hide for 3 weeks. The bruise. Elena had not known about the bruise until the hospital. She had known about the arm, had seen the moment 2 months ago, but not the bruise beneath the sleeve. And hearing Garrett say it out loud in this room with that particular steadiness was different from knowing it abstractly. It made it solid, real. The kind of real that doesn't permit further negotiation about what happened. Madison closed her eyes. 1 breath, 2. Then she opened them and looked at Margaret. I never meant for... she began. Don't, Margaret said. Quiet and absolute. Do not say you never meant for it. Everything you did was meant. Every breadbasket, every interrupted sentence, every document you put in front of me with a pen already uncapped, every phone call to a man without a real license, every conversation with an attorney who specializes in dismantling the rights of elderly women. She paused. All of it was meant. I will not sit in my hospital bed and accept an apology built on the premise that any part of it was accidental. Madison looked at her, and in that look, Elena finally understood something she had been trying to understand for 2 years. The thing that had confused her most about Madison, the thing that had made her watch more carefully for longer, instead of dismissing what she saw, was that Madison's cruelty had never looked like hatred. It had always looked like something more efficient than hatred, more purposeful. And looking at her now with every performance stripped away and only the operational intelligence visible, Elena understood. Madison Cole did not hate Margaret Weston. She felt nothing about Margaret Weston. Margaret was a variable, an obstacle that needed managing in order to access an outcome. That was, Elena thought, possibly the most frightening thing she had learned all evening. What happens now? Madison said. She directed it at Whitfield, businesslike, the performance fully abandoned. That depends on choices made in the next 24 hours, Whitfield said. Tonight you will remove yourself from this hospital and from Mr. Weston's property. Victor will accompany you to collect whatever personal items are immediately necessary. You will not contact Margaret Weston by any means. You will not contact Elena Vasquez. You will retain your own counsel and have them contact my office by 9 tomorrow morning. And if I don't cooperate, she said. Whitfield looked at her over his glasses. Then the fraud referral currently drafted as a civil matter becomes a criminal one. And the Carver connection, which currently exists in our files and not in any public record, gets sent to the 3 journalists who have been investigating the prior cases for the past 4 months. Independently of us, but Victor has been in contact with them as a precaution. A pause. They've been waiting for a current case to complete the picture. Silence. Madison stood. She straightened her coat. She looked at Garrett one final time, and he held her gaze, and neither of them said anything, and after a moment she looked away first. She walked to the door. Victor moved aside. She stopped with her hand on the frame. "For what it's worth," she said without turning around, "I did think the restaurant was beautiful." No one responded. She left. Victor followed. The room held the silence she left behind for a long moment. Then Margaret made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh, but something in between them that released 2 years of pressure in a single breath. "Well," she said, "that's done." Garrett sat on the edge of the bed again. He didn't say anything. He took his mother's hands again. Whitfield made a quiet phone call near the window that Elena didn't listen to, and Elena sat in her chair on the other side of the bed and felt the exhaustion of the entire evening land on her at once, all of it, from the moment she had reached for Madison's wrist in the restaurant to right now descending simultaneously the way a wave doesn't hit you until you stop running. "Elena," Margaret said, "I'm here. Are you all right?" The question caught her off guard. In the middle of everything, the fraud case, the hospital, the confrontation, her own employer, watching everything he'd built the past 2 years come apart, Margaret Weston was asking if Elena was all right. "I'm fine," Elena said. And then, because it was Margaret, and Margaret didn't accept insufficient answers, "I'm tired and a little overwhelmed, and very glad you called the ambulance when you did." "I told you," Margaret said with a ghost of her old dryness. "Sharp as a tack." "Sharp as a tack," Elena agreed. Garrett looked at Elena across the bed. He held her gaze. There were things in his expression that she didn't try to categorize, too many, too layered, too much the product of a single extraordinary evening for any of them to be fully formed yet. But one thing in it was clear enough. She had seen that specific quality of it before, actually, in the faces of the couple at table 2 with their private candle. The expression of someone who is looking at what is in front of them and seeing it finally without anything in the way. "Tomorrow," he said, "I need to speak with you. Not tonight. Tonight is too much for any conversation that matters. But tomorrow." "All right," Elena said. "I have things to say that have been overdue," he said. "In terms of—" He stopped himself. He was precise enough to know that imprecision on something important was worse than waiting. "Tomorrow," he said again. "Tomorrow," she said. Whitfield finished his call. He looked at Garrett. "The motion is confirmed. The petition is frozen as of 11:42 tonight. Carver's office will have a copy on their fax by morning." He paused. "It's clean, Garrett. Whatever she tries to do from here, the foundation is gone." Garrett nodded. "Stay available tonight." "Of course." Whitfield looked at Margaret. "Mrs. Weston, I'm very glad you're all right. Your husband would be—" He stopped. He seemed to feel correctly that whatever he had been about to say was too large for this room at this hour. He simply said, "You handled yourself with remarkable composure tonight." "I had help," Margaret said. She was looking at Elena when she said it. Whitfield left. The room was quieter now. The hospital had its own ambient sound, the distant murmur of the building's nighttime operations, and it filled the space in a way that was somehow easier to sit in than the silence after confrontation. "I want to stay tonight," Garrett said. To his mother. "I'll have someone bring whatever I need. I'm not leaving." "You don't need to, Mom, just her name." She accepted it. "All right," she said, "but you're taking the chair. I'm not giving up the bed. The chair is fine. It's a hospital chair." "I'm aware. It's designed specifically to prevent sleep." "Mom, I'm just noting it for the record." Elena smiled. She couldn't help it. She looked at her hands in her lap and smiled at the floor because the conversation happening over her head was so ordinary and so completely them that it was the most human thing she had heard all evening. "Elena," Garrett said, "I'll have a car take you home." "I can—" "Please," he said, not the tone that moved obstacles, just the word with the actual meaning of it intact. She looked at him. "Okay." She stood. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. She looked at Margaret, who was watching her with those clear gray eyes, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Because they didn't need to. 6 years of Tuesday evenings and 2 years of watching and 18 months of hot tea and one extraordinary night had produced between them something that did not require language to confirm. "Get some rest," Elena said finally. "You too," Margaret said. "And Elena," she turned. "I am sorry," Margaret said, "that it took all of this for people to finally see what you were doing." Elena stood in the doorway. She thought about 6 years of invisibility. She thought about the specific relief of not being seen, the safety of it, the freedom of it, the way it had allowed her to watch and understand and care without anyone being able to take those things away. She thought about the couple at table 2 with their candle. She thought about the first time she had brought Margaret's tea at exactly the right temperature and stood at the table a moment longer than she should have. "Don't be sorry," she said. "I think I needed the time to understand what I was seeing, to know what to do with it." A pause. Some things have to be watched for a long time before you know how to speak about them. Margaret held her gaze. "Yes," she said softly. "I think that's true." Elena nodded once. She looked at Garrett. "Good night, Mr. Weston." He was quiet for a moment. Then Garrett. She looked at him. "My name is Garrett," he said. "I think you've earned the use of it." She held his gaze for one measured second. Then she said, "Good night, Garrett." She walked out of the room. Down the corridor past the nurse's station, through the automatic doors, and into the cold night air of a city that was still running its quiet late-hour operations, entirely unaware that something had just finished that had been a long-time building. The car was waiting. She got in. She leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes and let the motion of the car do what motion does, the forward movement, the loosening, the permission to stop bracing. Her phone buzzed. "Danny," she answered. "I'm okay," she said. "Thank God," he said. "What happened? I'll tell you everything tomorrow," she said. "All of it. I promise." "Is Margaret okay?" "She's okay. She's more than okay." She paused. "She's sharp as a tack." Danny was quiet for a moment. "And you've really?" She thought about it. Outside the window, the city moved. The lights and the late pedestrians and the ordinary beautiful motion of a place that continued while specific lives inside it reached their turning points. "I'm seen," she said. It wasn't the answer Danny expected, and she knew it, and she didn't explain it further because she didn't need to. It was enough for tonight to say it out loud, to hold it in her own mouth as a fact. She had spent 6 years being invisible. She had thought for a long time that invisibility was safety, that it was a kind of protection for herself, for the things she cared about, for the work of seeing that required you to be unseen. She understood now that she had been wrong about that. Not entirely, but in the way that matters. The things worth seeing eventually require you to step into the light, and the people worth protecting eventually need someone willing to be visible on their behalf. And the courage that looks from the outside, like the decision of a single moment, a hand on a wrist, 4 words in a silent restaurant, is never actually a single moment. It is every quiet Tuesday for 6 years. It is every cup of tea carried at exactly the right temperature. It is the long, patient work of paying attention until you know with absolute certainty, without doubt, what you are looking at and what it requires of you. Elena Vasquez had grabbed a woman's wrist in front of 40 people. She had not done it because she was brave. She had done it because she had been paying attention for 6 years. And tonight, finally, so had everyone else. She slept for 5 hours. That was all her body would allow. At 6:14 in the morning, Elena was awake, sitting at her kitchen table with both hands around a coffee mug, watching the early light come through the window, the way it always did, slow and different, completely unaware that the person watching it had been through something the night before that had rearranged the furniture of her life in ways she hadn't fully assessed yet. Her phone had 11 missed messages. Danny 3 times, 2 unknown numbers she would deal with later. Gerald, which surprised her, Gerald, who never texted, who communicated through the formal channels of the schedule and the floor notes. His message said only, "I saw the footage too. All of it. I should have spoken sooner. I'm sorry." She read it twice and set the phone face down. She thought about what sorry meant when it arrived after the fact. She thought about what it meant that multiple people had seen pieces of what was happening to Margaret and had filed those pieces in a drawer somewhere, had told themselves it wasn't their place, had decided that the distance between what they suspected and what they could prove was too wide to cross. She had done the same thing for months. She understood the impulse completely. She did not excuse it in herself, and she did not excuse it in Gerald. And she understood that understanding something and excusing it were not the same thing and never had been. At 7:30, her phone rang. Not a text, an actual call. She looked at the screen. The name that came up was one she had added to her contacts at approximately 10:55 the previous night in the backseat of a car because she had not known if she would need it and had decided she would rather have it and not need it than the reverse. Garrett Weston. She answered on the second ring. "Good morning," he said. His voice had the specific quality of someone who had also not slept a full night and was not pretending otherwise. "Good morning," she said. "How is she?" "Awake," he said. "Ate breakfast, complained about the eggs, demanded real tea, not the bag they brought, convinced the overnight nurse to find her a crossword." A pause that contained something warm. "She's fine. She's entirely herself." Elena exhaled something she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "The doctor wants to keep her one more day," Garrett continued, "for observation. Her blood pressure is still elevated, not dangerously, but enough that they want to monitor it." He paused. "She agreed, which tells me she's actually tired because under normal circumstances, she would have already discharged herself." "Under normal circumstance," Elena said, "she wouldn't have needed to be there in the first place." "No," he said, "she wouldn't have." He was quiet for a moment. James was at the hospital at 6 this morning. The two documents transferring Asset Management Authority, they're being reversed. The language Madison used was designed to look like routine estate maintenance, but James says the construction is fraudulent on its face. Any judge who looks at it against the context of the Carver connection and the Ambrose fraud will agree. Another pause. "It's going to be fine, Elena. The legal part. My mother is going to be fine." She heard what was under that. The specific relief of a man who had spent the night in a hospital chair, calculating worst-case scenarios and arriving exhausted at the better one. "And Madison," she said. "Her attorney contacted James at 8 this morning," Garrett said. "They want to negotiate. James told them the terms are not negotiable, and the only variable is whether we take the criminal referral public before or after she cooperates." A pause. "She'll cooperate. You sound certain." "I am certain. Because what she doesn't know, what her attorney doesn't know yet, is that one of the 3 prior cases Victor identified has a woman who has been looking for a current case to attach her complaint to for 2 years. She's been waiting. Her family has been waiting. The moment this becomes a matter of public record, they attach. And Carver loses his license. And Madison Cole is not just the subject of a civil fraud action, but the key witness in a multi-state pattern. He said it without satisfaction. Just facts. The clean delivery of a man who has done what needed doing and is not interested in celebrating it. "She'll cooperate." Elena sat with that for a moment. "Those other women," she said quietly. "The prior cases." "Yes. Is someone contacting them?" "Their families." A pause. "Victor is, as of this morning." Another pause, slightly longer. "You're thinking about whether Margaret is the only one who needed someone to see what was happening." "Yes," Elena said. "She isn't," Garrett said. "And that's something I'm going to have to sit with for a while. That this happened to others. That the pattern existed and I was part of a version of it and I didn't." He stopped. "I didn't see." The sentence arrived exactly as it had arrived the night before in the hallway and in the security office and at Margaret's bedside. The same sentence at the center of everything, the one Garrett Weston kept returning to, because it was the true one and he was all. Elena had come to understand a man who insisted on the true ones no matter how uncomfortable they were. "You see now," she said. "Yes," he said. "I do." A beat. "I meant what I said last night. I need to speak with you. Today, if you're willing, not on the phone." She looked at her coffee mug. She thought about the fact that she was still technically employed at Weston's, that the dinner service would run tonight with or without this phone call, that her section would need coverage, and the reservation system would not pause for extraordinary circumstances. She thought about the fact that she was sitting in her kitchen in yesterday's clothes, having slept 5 hours after the most significant night of her professional life. "I can come in at 2, she said. "I'll be there," he said. The restaurant was quiet at 2 in the afternoon. The lunch service had ended, the prep for dinner hadn't begun in earnest, and the dining room had the particular stillness of a space between purposes. Tables reset, and waiting light coming in at a different angle than it did at night. The whole room looking slightly more ordinary and slightly more beautiful than it did when it was full of people. Elena had dressed carefully, not formally. but carefully in the way you dress when you understand that a conversation matters and you want to meet it with some form of intention. She arrived at 5 minutes to 2 and Gerald was at the door, and he held it open for her, and when she walked past him, he said her name in a way that carried the full weight of his 11 missed message, the one that ended in, "I'm sorry." "Thank you, Gerald," she said. She meant it. She kept walking. Garrett was already there. He was at the corner table, Margaret's table, which Elena registered immediately and said nothing about. He stood when she came in, which was not something she had ever seen him do, and he waited while she came across the room, and he said, "Thank you for coming," like she had done him a favor by walking into his own restaurant. She sat. He sat. There was coffee on the table. Real coffee from the good machine, not the service line. A small plate of something from the kitchen. She recognized the care in both and said nothing about that either. "I'm going to say several things," he said, "and I'd like to say all of them before you respond, because I have a tendency to be interrupted by my own second guessing, and I've been rehearsing this since 4 this morning, and I'd like to get through it." She almost smiled. "All right." He looked at her directly. "6 years," he said. "You have worked in this restaurant for 6 years. In that time, you have been, by every account, I have now taken the trouble to gather the most consistently excellent member of my floor staff. Gerald has rated you at the top of his evaluations every single cycle. Customer feedback with your name on it is overwhelmingly positive and specifically personal. People don't write good service. They write her name and a specific thing you did that meant something to them. You have covered shifts that no one asked you to cover. You have de-escalated situations that should have required management. You have for 18 months protected my mother in this restaurant while I was not present to do it myself." He paused. "And I did not know your name without asking." The sentence arrived the same way it had arrived the night before, with the same weight, the same clean, uncomfortable accuracy. "I want to correct that," he said, "starting with the fact that you are not a waitress." She looked at him. "I'm fairly certain that's my job title." "Your job title is whatever I decide it is," he said. "That's a benefit of owning the building." He said it without arrogance, just factually. What you have been doing in this restaurant for 6 years is not what I pay you for. I pay you to carry plates and manage sections and upsell the wine pairing. What you actually do is watch, understand, respond to what's real rather than what's performed. Make people feel seen in a room that is specifically designed to make them feel important, which is an entirely different thing. He paused. "That's a skill I didn't know I was employing. I'd like to employ it deliberately." She sat very still. "What does that mean specifically?" "It means I want to offer you a different position. Guest relations, which is a formal title for an informal thing that you've been doing without the title or the compensation. You would move through the room the way you already move through it. You would manage the experience of specific guests who require particular care. You would be visible, acknowledged, paid appropriately for what you actually do." He paused. "My mother would be on that list, specifically and permanently." Elena looked at him across the table. She was processing. Not the offer was clear enough, but what was beneath the offer, the thing he was actually asking. He was asking her to stop being invisible, to do deliberately with his explicit support and in full view the things she had been doing quietly at the margins for 6 years. "Why?" she said. He looked at her. "Because you deserve it." "That's not the only reason," she said. "No," he agreed, "it's not." He was quiet for a moment. "Because I have spent the past 12 hours looking at what has been happening in this restaurant and understanding that the most important things have been occurring in the spaces I wasn't looking at. And I don't want to run a restaurant that way anymore. I don't want it to run anything that way anymore." He paused. "And because my mother asked me to." Elena stopped. "She asked you to." "This morning at approximately 7:25, before I called you." He almost smiled. "She said," and I'm quoting precisely because she was very specific, she said, "Don't you dare let that woman spend another year being invisible in your restaurant, Garrett. She has more sense than anyone in that building, including you." He looked at Elena. "I told her that was probably accurate." Elena looked at her coffee cup. She was quiet for long enough that Garrett did not fill the silence, which she appreciated because she needed the silence to hold several things at once. The weight of 6 years, The weight of last night, the weight of a conversation about a green dress and wrong wine and a woman who took her tea very hot, the weight of a hand on a form in a box that said emergency contact with her name written in it 8 months ago by someone who trusted her without telling her she was trusted. There's something I want to say to you, Elena said finally. All right. What I did at the restaurant and last night, I need you to understand that it wasn't about you. I wasn't trying to expose anything about you specifically or make any kind of statement about how you ran the restaurant or managed your personal life. She stopped. She tried again. Margaret was being hurt in a specific, quiet, persistent way that was designed to be invisible. And I had been watching it and not acting on it for longer than I'm comfortable with. What I did Tuesday night was not a decision made in a moment of exceptional courage. She looked at him. It was what happens when you watch something long enough and run out of reasons to keep quiet. Garrett was looking at her with the full, unmediated attention she had come to recognize as his most honest mode. I know, he said. I watched the footage. Then you know it wasn't heroic, she said. I know it was necessary, he said. Those are different things and also the same thing sometimes. He paused. What you're really saying is that you don't want to be positioned as someone who acted for effect. You want me to understand what actually motivated it. Yes, she said. I do understand it, he said. It was love, not dramatic love, not performed love. The specific, practical love of someone who has been paying attention to another person for a long time and will not let them be harmed. He said it simply without decoration as a statement of observed fact. I recognize it because I watched you demonstrate it for 18 months on a security monitor at 4 a.m. A pause. And because it looks nothing like what I thought love looked like until about 12 hours ago. The afternoon light sat between them. The restaurant was still quiet. Somewhere in the back, the kitchen prep was beginning. She could hear the specific sounds of it, the familiar sequence she had worked alongside for 6 years. I'll take the position, she said. Something in his face released. Good. With conditions. He almost smiled fully this time. Of course. Margaret's table is never double booked on Tuesdays, she said. Whether she comes or not, the table is hers. No special occasion overrides it, no party buyout. It's hers. Done, he said. The tea is always hot, she said. Someone on every shift is specifically responsible for knowing that and for knowing every regular guest's equivalent of it. The thing that makes them feel cared for rather than served. That becomes a standard, not a personal habit. He was watching her with something that had moved past business and into something more personal and was not trying to conceal it. Done, he said. And Gerald gets the credit, she said, for what he saw. He saw it too. He didn't know what to do with it, but he saw it. That matters. Garrett looked at her for a moment. That matters to you. People who see things and struggle with what to do with them deserve to be treated differently than people who don't see things at all, she said. Gerald saw it. He needs to know that counts for something. Otherwise, the next time someone on your staff sees something they're not sure how to act on, they'll remember that seeing wasn't enough and they'll go back to looking away. He was quiet. You've thought about this a great deal. I thought about it all night, she said. Couldn't sleep. Neither could I, he said. Hospital chairs are exactly as bad as my mother warned me. This time she did smile. She let it happen. And he saw it, and something in his face shifted, a door opening where there had been a wall, and he didn't look away. Then his phone vibrated on the table. He looked at it. His expression changed. Victor, he said. He answered. He listened for approximately 45 seconds. His jaw tightened once and then released. He said, handle it, and ended the call. What happened? Elena said. Carver filed an emergency counter motion this morning, he said, trying to preempt the fraud referral by claiming the guardianship petition was submitted in good faith based on medical evidence later found to be unreliable. He's trying to make Ambrose the fall guy and distance Madison from the intent. He paused. It won't work, but it means today is going to be longer than I planned. Go, she said. Elena, go do what needs doing, she said. Margaret is taken care of. The legal situation is in James's hands. Go. He looked at her. I want to finish this conversation. We will, she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he stood. He picked up his phone and his jacket, and he looked at her one more time from a standing position with the restaurant behind him and the afternoon light doing what it did. And Elena looked back, and they both understood without saying it in the particular language of two people who have been watching each other for far longer than either of them, realized that this conversation had no ending because it was not an ending. It was a beginning that had been delayed by 6 years of not looking in the right place. Two things when he said he was at the edge of leaving and had stopped. First, James is filing a motion on behalf of the other 3 women, their families, using our documentation as the foundation. It's going to cost more than the recovery justifies financially, and James told me so, and I told him to file it anyway. He looked at her steadily. I want you to know that. She looked at him. Thank you, she said. And then, what's the second thing? He reached into his jacket pocket and set something on the table in front of her. A single key on a plain ring. She looked at it. It was not a car key. It was not a house key. It was the kind of simple, generic key that went with the specific kind of door. The security office, he said, you have full access to all footage, all archives current and future, he paused. Because the most important things in this building have been happening in the spaces I wasn't watching, and I need someone who is actually paying attention to have access to all of it. She looked at the key. She thought about what it meant, not the access, the footage of the archive, the trust of it, the specific act of a man who had spent the night accounting for his own blindness, deciding with the precision that defined him exactly how to correct it. She picked up the key. All right, she said. He nodded once. He walked out. She heard the door, and then she heard the particular silence of the restaurant without him in it, which was different from the silence before he arrived, and she sat in it for a moment with the key in her hand. Then she heard footsteps. Not Garrett's. These were coming from the back, from the kitchen corridor, and she recognized them before she saw the person because she had been hearing those footsteps for 6 years. Danny came through the kitchen door, still in his street clothes, and he stopped when he saw her at Margaret's table. You're here, he said. I'm here, she said. He crossed the room and sat down across from her, without being asked the way people do when formality has been rendered irrelevant by circumstances. He looked at the key in her hand and then at her face. What is that? He said. Security office, she said. Full access. He stared at her. He gave you a key to the security office. He gave me a key to the security office. Danny was quiet for a moment, then, what exactly happened between 9:30 last night and right now? Sit down properly, Elena said. I'll tell you all of it. He was already sitting. He sat more fully, if that was possible, settled in with the posture of someone prepared to receive an account that is going to take some time. Elena told him. All of it in order the way it had happened without dramatizing because it didn't need dramatizing. It was already the most dramatic 20 hours of her professional life, and the facts were sufficient on their own. When she finished, Danny was quiet for a long moment. The attorney, he said finally. Carver, and the 3 prior women. Yes. That's not a woman who went bad somewhere along the way, he said slowly. That's a design. She came in with a design. Yes, Elena said. That's what Margaret said. That's exactly the word Margaret used. And Garrett didn't, he genuinely had no idea. He had no idea, Elena said. He had feelings he couldn't name, and a mother he wasn't watching closely enough, and a woman who had constructed an entire architecture of trust that was designed to withstand exactly the kind of brief, infrequent scrutiny he was applying. She paused. He's not stupid. He's not a bad son. He's a man who decided he could delegate attention and learned last night that some things cannot be delegated. Danny looked at the table. I saw things too, he said. Small things. I filed them away. I know you did, she said. I should have, Danny. She said his name the way Margaret had said her son's name when she wanted him to stop a sentence that was going somewhere unproductive. What matters is what happens from here, what we see going forward, what we do with it. She paused. That's what matters. He looked at her. You sound different, he said. You sound like someone who has decided something, he said. Something large. She considered this. I think I decided something on Tuesday night at the restaurant, she said. I just didn't know how large it was until the rest of it caught up. The kitchen sounds had grown behind them, the real sounds of preparation beginning the dinner service, assembling itself around them, with the reliable momentum of something that continued regardless of what had happened the night before in a hospital room, or a security office, or a side hallway where a woman had told a man the truth for the first time in 6 years. Elena stood. She picked up the key. She put it in her pocket. "I have work to do," she said. "The position he offered you," Danny said. "You're taking it." "I already took it." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said with the quiet sincerity of someone who doesn't offer sincerity cheaply, "Good. You should have had it years ago." "Yes," she said simply. "I should have." She walked toward the kitchen. She had a section to brief a staff to coordinate a dinner service to build from the ground up, the way she had built every service for 6 years. Except tonight she was not invisible. Tonight she had a key in her pocket, in a position with a title, and a table reserved for a woman she loved in the specific, practical, unperformed way that made all the other kinds of love more legible. Tonight the restaurant was the same building it had been yesterday, and she was a different version of the person who had walked into it. 3 weeks later, Margaret Weston came back to Weston's on a Tuesday evening. She came alone. She wore a blue dress that was not the green one from 1987, but had the same quality of intention, the dress of a woman who has decided the evening is worth dressing for. She came through the door, and Elena was already moving toward her. Not running, not hurrying, but moving with the direct momentum of someone who has been expecting someone they care about and is glad they arrived. "Mrs. Weston," Elena said. "I told you to call me Margaret," Margaret said. "Margaret," Elena said. "Welcome back." Margaret looked around the restaurant. She took it in the tables, the light, the low current of conversation, the room that had been hers and her husband's, and then hers alone, and then temporarily made small, and was now simply hers again. She took it all in with the comprehensive, unhurried attention of a woman who has earned the right to take her time. "Good table," Elena said. "My table," Margaret said. Elena took her to the corner. She pulled out the chair. She sat Margaret down with the care that had nothing to do with frailty and everything to do with intention, the deliberate act of placing someone in the space they deserve. She brought the tea without being asked. Hot, the right temperature. Set it down in front of Margaret with both hands the way you set down something that matters. Margaret wrapped her hands around the cup. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Elena. "Still warm," she said. "Always," Elena said. Margaret smiled. The real one, the one that reached her eyes and kept going, the one Elena had been watching for across 2 years of Tuesdays, through every performance of composure and every managed silence and every small indignity that had tried to extinguish it and had not succeeded. That smile was still there. It had always been there. It had just needed someone to stay in the room long enough and pay close enough attention to see it. Elena saw it. She had always seen it. That was the whole of it, and it was enough, more than enough, and it always had been.